Chapter 1. The Cage in the Storm. By the time the sky over Outpost Khaled turned the color of bruised iron, senior xenobiologist Tarif Seln had already decided that bringing a human to the handling deck was an act of institutional desperation. The storm season on Khaled 9 had a way of making every bad judgment feel briefly plausible. The winds tore red dust off the Badlands in screaming sheets, power grids flickered, tempers shortened, and the mining colony's outer research ring built half from military surplus and half from optimistic engineering shook, just enough each night to remind everyone they were living on a world that had never actually agreed to host them. Under those conditions, the Directorate had made what they insisted was a practical choice. If no one in the xenobiology unit could get close enough to the captured beast to sedate, examine, or relocate it without losing a limb, perhaps the contracted human security specialist could assist with behavioral stabilization. Tarif hated the phrasing almost as much as he hated the idea behind it. Interspecies science had spent 3 generations trying to drag itself away from the old frontier habit of treating humans as useful instruments whenever the problem involved violence, fear, or things with too many teeth. Yet here they were again, with a failed containment protocol, 3 injured handlers, 1 dead tranquilizer team chief, and a request on Tarif's slate politely asking whether the human might do better. The beast, officially catalogued as VX-113 Khaled Apex, had been captured 12 days earlier in the basalt trenchlands beyond Mine Corridor 3 after it killed 2 survey crawlers, uprooted a drilling rig, and left behind enough scattered plating to make the colonial board suddenly interested in the ecology they had ignored for the previous 11 years. It was not native in the simple sense. Khaled 9 had produced many vicious organisms, but nothing like this. VX-113 seemed to belong to an older lineage or an imported one gone feral long enough to invent its own rules. It was vast 6 meters nose to tail, low-slung and black-skinned with armored ridges along the spine, 6 legs ending in hooked weight-bearing claws, and a head built like an argument against mercy. Every surface of it looked designed to discourage optimism. The jaws could open wider than most chest cavities. The outer skin, matte and scale-slick at once, resisted both low-yield pulse fire and standard dermal injectors. Its eyes were the worst feature, not because they glowed or mirrored or carried any theatrical monstrosity, but because they were steady. Animal, yes, but not stupid. They followed patterns, learned timing, waited when waiting improved the kill. That was why 3 handlers had been mauled despite full rig protection. They kept approaching it like an agitated specimen. The beast kept treating them like prey who had mistaken proximity for control. And now it was loose again. Not fully loose. If it had been fully loose, there would have been evacuation sirens rather than bitter academic meetings, but loose enough inside Containment Hall B that every person in the ring gallery watched from behind reinforced glass, with the same shameful mixture of fear and curiosity that always emerges when someone else's expertise starts failing in a very physical direction. The central cage was a broad magnetic pen with retractable gate barriers, emergency foam ports, and enough backup field generators to hold a shuttle engine in place. VX-113 had broken 2 of them already. It moved now through the dim chamber below with a wounded but terrible confidence, tail lashing, breath fogging in the chilled air, every few seconds lowering its head toward the blood still drying in one corner, where assistant handler Peth had lost his arm before medics got him out. Tarif stood in the upper control room with both hands braced on the console and tried not to hear the private commentary from the station executives who had arrived only after the situation became dramatic enough to threaten funding. One of them asked, too softly for courage but loud enough for insult, whether the human had been paid hazard bonus yet. Another wondered if their species-specific aggression profile might finally justify its contract. Tarif did not turn around. He had spent half his professional life fighting the assumption that humans existed in scientific installations as some hybrid between tool and superstition. He had no intention of becoming the sort of coward who leaned on that assumption the first time his own methods stopped looking elegant. Then the human arrived. Elias Voss was not what the frightened preferred. He was not massive, not scar-covered in obvious ways, not swaggering, not loud. In some ways that made him worse. He entered the control room in plain field gray with the light armor vest still dusted from perimeter duty, carrying no long gun and only the compact sidearm station regulations required beyond the habitation block. His dark hair was still damp from the outer storm. One sleeve had been rolled halfway up absent-mindedly, exposing the pale, old seam of a burned scar at the forearm. He looked less like a war hero than a man interrupted during practical work, and not particularly pleased about the interruption. Yet when the room registered his presence, the executives stopped whispering. The med tech at the rear unconsciously straightened. Even the security chief, who technically outranked him in the local command chain, shifted over by a fraction. It was not deference exactly. More the body's old recognition that some people have been close enough to lethal chaos for long enough that the atmosphere around them acquires habits of its own. Tarav turned at last. This is not standard station procedure. No, Elias said, stepping to the observation glass and looking down into the chamber without any visible effort at courage. Looks like standard station panic. That should have irritated Tarav. Instead he felt, absurdly, a flicker of relief at the dryness of it. 3 handlers injured. 1 breach. Tranquilizer uptake failed. The field is still functional, but the animal has started patterning around our timing. He hated how much that sounded like explanation under pressure. It's not a combat problem. Elias kept his eyes on the beast. Everything with teeth is a behavior problem before it's a combat problem. One of the executives, a thin-lipped export liaison with too much jewelry for a dust colony, gave an offended little sniff. The beast isn't here to be philosophized at, Mr. Voss. We need it subdued. Elias finally glanced back. Then you should be grateful someone here bothered to learn the difference. Tarav almost smiled despite himself. Below them, VX 113 had gone very still. That was wrong enough that Tarav's attention snapped back to the chamber immediately. Until then the beast had been pacing in wide erratic circles, feinting at inactive barriers, probing corners where the magnetic field whined weakest. Now it stood beneath the central overhead lamps with its head raised and body angled not toward the broken gate or the blood-scented floor, but directly toward the observation glass. The room quieted. The animal's nostrils widened once, twice. Then its gaze found Elias. There are moments when silence changes texture. The beast did not charge. That, more than a charge, unnerved everyone present. It simply looked at him, and something in the look became too focused for comfort. Elias stepped closer to the glass. He was not showing off. If anything, he moved with the reluctant attention of someone who had just realized a problem was no longer generic. Tarav heard himself say, "Do not encourage it." Elias did not answer. The beast's tail stopped moving. Its chest expanded slowly. Every line of its body shifted out of agitation and into assessment. Not prey behavior. Not territorial rage. Something else. Recognition. If such a word can be used for things built half from ancient evolution and half from predatory mathematics. The export liaison laughed nervously. What is it doing? No one replied. Because VX 113, that impossible black horror from the trenchlands, had just taken one step back from the glass. Not in fear exactly. Not submission. A recalibration. The movement of a hunter who has suddenly realized the shape, watching from outside the cage, is not merely another meddling herbivore with tools. The beast's head lowered by increments. Its lips peeled back from the teeth not in attack, but in the involuntary reveal many predators give when uncertain whether what they see is threat, rival, or a mirror from a species they do not understand. Tarav looked at Elias. The human had not changed posture, had not bared teeth, not raised his voice, not done anything the manuals would call aggressive display. He was simply standing there with one hand lightly touching the console rail, and his eyes fixed on the creature below with an intensity so stripped of ornament that it no longer looked social. Later, in every official statement, Tarav would insist he did not believe in mystical nonsense about species instincts and Deathworld aura. But in that moment, he felt an old animal chill run through his secondary lungs anyway, because the thing in the cage had seen something before any of them had words for it. The beast recognized the predator in the man's gaze. And Tarav, who had spent 20 years reducing dangerous life into observable systems and measurable drives, found himself utterly, professionally speechless. Chapter 2. The Thing the Beast Saw. No one in the control room wanted to be the first to interpret what had just happened, Because interpretation makes fear real in administrative environments, and administrators will tolerate many risks before they tolerate that. So for several long seconds, the only sounds were the low harmonic growl of the containment field, the distant rattle of the storm against the outer station shell, and the wet, measured breathing of VX 113 below. The beast remained fixed on Elias with total attention. Not frenzy, not confusion. The kind of attention predators reserve for the rare moment they realize the equation has changed and they must decide whether to test it or survive by caution. Tara felt every eye in the room sliding, however reluctantly, from the animal to the human beside him. Elias exhaled once through his nose. "Well," he said softly, almost to himself, "that's inconvenient." Tara seized on the line because it was better than admitting the room had just become metaphysical. "Explain." The human's gaze stayed on the beast. "It's not treating me like background anymore." "That is obvious." "No," Elias said. "What's obvious is that it noticed me. The problem is how." The export liaison bristled. "We are discussing an animal, not some frontier myth." At that, Elias finally turned his head enough to look at the man properly. The liaison took one step back before clearly deciding he had not intended to. Tara noticed. So did everyone else. "The galaxy keeps telling itself humans are dangerous because we're inventive," Elias said. "Or stubborn. Or because our military's built some good special operations doctrine and everyone loves a dramatic explanation." He looked back at the beast. "That's all true enough. But the older reason is simpler. We come from a world where almost everything alive either eats something else, avoids being eaten, or gets very good at pretending it's not in one of those two categories until the last second. Predators know what focus looks like. Real focus. They know what a body looks like when it has already stopped wondering whether violence is possible and started calculating where it becomes efficient. A beat. This one sees that. The room hated the answer because it fit too cleanly over the event. Tarov, however, was a scientist before he was anything else, and even shock could not fully erase the instinct to follow the pattern where it led. "You're suggesting cross-species predatory recognition." "I'm suggesting your beast came from a bad enough world or bad enough design legacy that it understands certain things without needing them translated." "That's absurd," muttered the export liaison. Tarov ignored him. "And it sees that in you." Elias's mouth moved by the smallest amount. Not a smile, but an acknowledgement of unpleasant bookkeeping. "Probably." "Why?" This time Elias did smile, though tiredly. "That's a more personal question than your staff badge usually entitles you to." No one laughed. Below, VX 113 shifted its weight and gave one low chuffing sound into the chamber air, not a roar, not a challenge, but something exploratory. Elias answered by doing absolutely nothing. That inaction itself became instruction. The beast moved one pace left. Elias's eyes tracked. The tail lashed once. Stopped. Tarov, fascinated despite all reasonable restraint, began watching not the beast, but the conversation of stillness between them. Every handler they had sent so far had arrived braced with visible fear or false dominance. Everyone had shouted, gestured, postured, or relied on the confidence that comes from barriers and protocols. Elias did none of that. He was present with a totality that read less like threat display and more like the absence of prey behavior. The distinction, Tarov suddenly understood, might be the whole key. Most species survive by signaling normalcy to danger. I am not worth the energy. I am not contesting. I am not prey if I can help it. Humans, or this human at least, had another mode entirely. When fully awake to risk, Elias did not seem to signal anything at all. He simply occupied the space as if danger were already inside the planning loop rather than outside it. "Could you go in there?" Tarov asked before his ethics caught up. The room jerked toward him in outrage. "Good. Better scandal than silence." Elias looked at him, and for 1 second Tarov saw exactly what the beast might have seen. Not bloodlust. That would have been easier. No, what looked back at him was something colder and perhaps more frightening. A man who had obviously gone into dangerous enclosures before, known the cost, and was now deciding whether the request in front of him belonged to necessity or stupidity. "Could I?" Elias repeated. "Maybe." He glanced again at the beast. "Should I?" "Depends how much you want to keep your insurance premiums theoretical." The export liaison found his courage in bureaucracy. We are not authorizing unsanctioned human-animal contact based on instinct folklore and improvised anthropology. You already authorized 6 people to get torn open with sanctioned stupidity, Elias said. So I'd be careful which nouns you're feeling proud of. Tarav stepped in before the liaison could escalate them into institutional nonsense. If not entry, then what? That earned him the full answer. Elias pointed toward the control banks. Kill the overhead glare. It's pinning the chamber like a challenge field. Narrow the sound suppressors near the north wall. There's a standing vibration there that's irritating it. And stop moving people behind the glass. Right now, every body in this room looks like noise, and it's trying to determine whether the noise hides attack. He tilted his head slightly, reading the chamber with a fluency Tarav resented and needed simultaneously. You've built this whole setup around the assumption that a stronger enclosure equals calmer behavior. But if a predator thinks the enclosure itself is an adversary, all you've done is make a maze where the walls bite. Tarav did not realize he had already begun issuing the changes until his own voice came back to him over the console net. The lights dimmed. The north wall suppressors narrowed. Non-essential staff were forced back from the glass despite scandalized objections. The chamber below softened from interrogation brightness into a low industrial dusk more akin to a den than an execution stage. The effect on VX-113 was immediate. Not magical, not total, but immediate. The head came up less sharply. The tail dropped by 1 degree. The pacing pattern changed from jagged angular challenge routes into wider, more energy-efficient circles. It was still dangerous. Still one burst of tendon and teeth away from murder. But it had stopped trying to solve the room through escalation. The liaison, cornered now by reality, made the fatal social mistake of trying to reclaim authority through contempt. Fine. The animal dislikes poor lighting design. What a revelation. That still doesn't explain why it behaved as though Mr. Voss were some sort of superior hunter. Because he is, said Duvan from the doorway. No one had heard the station's security commander enter. Mar was a slab of old frontier pragmatism in a black command jacket. One eye half clouded by an injury the rumor nets said involved a boarding action and a human rescue line no one had ever officially acknowledged. He had the kind of reputation that made juniors stand straighter even when he was not looking at them. Now he leaned against the hatch frame with one hand in his pocket and regarded the room like a teacher walking into children arguing over whether fire is hot. You all keep talking as if this is some philosophical revelation, he said. It isn't. It's pattern recognition. I've seen raiders break contact on one look from him. I've seen cornered animals choose a different target because they read the numbers better than our own analysts. You people brought him in because the station was out of elegant options. Don't start acting surprised when ugly competence works. Tarav turned. You know him. I hire him when the problem has already embarrassed my official teams. Mars visible I flicked to Elias. You still don't have to do this. Elias shrugged, but it was the small, unhappy shrug of a man who had long ago made peace with being used for precisely this kind of thing when the world ran out of alternatives. I know. Below them, VX-113 stopped pacing entirely. It lowered itself, slowly, to the deck plating near the north wall still upright enough to spring, but no longer burning itself against the chamber. The 6 eyes never left Elias. Tarav felt something like professional vertigo open inside him. It's mirroring your stillness. Not quite, Elias said. It's deciding whether stillness is safer than challenge. And he considered the beast. The beast considered him. The whole room seemed to tighten around a truth no one wanted first custody of. And it thinks I mean what I'm doing, Elias said. The sentence should not have been remarkable. It landed like a drop blade anyway. Because now Tarav understood the final, most unsettling part of the recognition. It was not that the beast saw generic human aggression. It saw commitment. Not bluster. Not performative courage. A predator that had evolved or been engineered to read weakness, intent, and threat had looked into Elias Voss's eyes and found the one thing all serious hunters recognize immediately. Not the wish to kill, but the settled capacity to do so cleanly if the line were crossed. No one in the room knew what to say after that. Tarav least of all. He had spent his career believing knowledge civilized fear. In that control room above the containment cage, with the beast gone low and watchful and the humans standing beside the glass like a storm that had chosen, for the moment, not to break. he discovered there are some truths knowledge only sharpens. Chapter 3. The alien had no words left. The decision to open the inner restraint corridor did not belong, officially, to any one person. That is the usual shape of institutional cowardice when a dangerous choice must be made under too many witnesses. Later, the report would say the action followed from a convergence of behavioral stabilization indicators, revised field parameters, and emergency necessity under adaptive expert guidance. In plain speech, everyone in the control room realized that if VX-113 remained alive, wounded, and trapped in that half-broken chamber much longer, the next failure would likely turn local and final. They also realized no standard handler could get close enough to administer the deep sedative at the joint line behind the skull without triggering another mauling. So the room began moving toward one inevitable absurdity while pretending the motion was procedural rather than human. Tarav hated himself for allowing it. He hated the executives for silently letting it become acceptable the moment they sensed it might work. He hated the beast for being magnificent and terrible enough to force the issue. Most of all, he hated Elias for standing there with the infuriating composure of someone who had already accepted the risk and only wanted the rest of them to stop narrating their fear in official language. Yet hate did not prevent clarity. The sedative injector was calibrated. The sound field was narrowed. The chamber geometry had been altered just enough that the beast now rested, if not peacefully, then at least in a state where decision seemed to interest it more than immediate violence. And Elias, after one private word with Mar, stepped toward the decantam lock without any theatrical pause for courage. That was what unsettled Tarav most. Not the willingness, the lack of drama around it. As though entering an enclosure with a war beast that had already ripped trained handlers apart was simply another species of labor. Stop him, the export liaison said weakly. Mar did not even turn. You can't afford the words if he succeeds. So Elias went in. He wore no heavy combat rig, only the same gray field gear, a bite-resistant forearm wrap, and the injector canister clipped low at the back. No rifle, no shock baton. Tarav understood the logic immediately and wished he did not. Large visible weapons would force the chamber back into direct contest. Elias was entering not as dominant predator, but as a thing the beast would have to classify from scratch at close range. The inner corridor cycled. The field between him and VX-113 dropped from hard barrier to selective arc mesh. Enough to slow a full charge, not enough to save a fool. The beast rose the instant he crossed the threshold. Everybody in the control room locked. VX-113 came up fluidly, 6 limbs finding purchase with horrid grace, mouth opening just enough to show the wet architecture of its jaw. Elias stopped 7 meters from it and did absolutely nothing. No spread stance, no raised hands, no calming speech for the benefit of the sentimental. He simply stood with one shoulder slightly angled, gaze not fixed directly into the eyes, but not flinching from them either. Tarav realized, with the nausea of watching another discipline prove itself superior under pressure, that this was the first honest interaction anyone had attempted with the beast since capture. All prior handling assumed the animal must submit to role assignment specimen, asset, threat unit, containment problem. Elias met it as if it were what it had always been, another living intelligence built around violence and consequence, fully capable of reading a lie. The creature made the first test. 1 step. Slow. Head low. Tail rigid. Elias did not move. A 2nd step. Slight angle right. Probing flank approach. Still nothing. Only that terrible economy in his posture. The sense that every line of him remained unwasted until necessity made motion worth the expenditure. The beast halted 3 meters away. From the gallery above, Tarav felt his own secondary lungs struggling to draw air around the pressure in his chest. He had studied predator behavior for 2 decades. He knew dominance displays, fear responses, territorial loops, prey feints, investigative circling. This was none of them cleanly. It was recognition trying to decide policy. And beneath his scientific horror, a more primitive understanding had begun growing roots. The room below did not contain one predator and one man. It contained 2 survivorship logics looking at each other over the possibility of pain. Then Elias spoke. Not loud. Not even firm in the ordinary command sense. Just low enough that the chamber microphones had to boost the sound for the gallery. "All right," he said. "Enough." The beast's ears or whatever structures served the same function tilted forward. "I know what they did," Elias continued. "I know what this room feels like. I know every set of hands that came in here told you they were in control before they hurt you." His voice remained absurdly calm. "I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to end this part." Tarav closed his eyes for one heartbeat because the words were insane and, worse, appropriate. Of course a human would speak to the beast like that. Not because humans anthropomorphized everything, as the old sneers claimed, but because they recognized patterns of coercion across categories faster than most species were comfortable admitting. The beast did not understand the language, perhaps, but it understood tone. It understood the absence of false bravado. It understood, Tarav thought with a chill, that this was not a creature trying to dominate from safety. This was one that had lived inside cages too, metaphorical or otherwise, and had come out knowing the architecture from the inside. VX-113 made its second test by moving faster than thought. Not a full strike. A faint lunge, stopping a half-meter short with jaws snapping shut on air loud enough to make 3 people in the control room shout involuntarily. Elias moved then just once, just enough, and so efficiently that Tarav almost missed the action. He stepped not back, but obliquely, occupying the line the beast had left open while pivoting his wrapped forearm into the side of the head, not to hit, but to redirect the bite vector away from center mass. The beast spun. Elias was already gone from the obvious follow-up arc. The chamber exploded into motion and then froze again as both reset 2 steps apart. Ralno, wrong memory. Tarav realized only distantly that his mind had reached for older stories to survive this one. Mar's voice cut into the control room. "There? You see that? It's testing commitment." Tarav did see. More than that. He saw something he would later wish he could unknow. Elias had not reacted like prey. He had not even reacted like a handler. He had reacted like another hunter whose body understood exactly when a feint becomes strike, and exactly how little movement must be spent until the answer is unavoidable. There was no panic in him at all, only narrowing calculation. It was that look again, the one the beast had read through the glass before anyone else. The room around Tarav seemed suddenly, horribly correct. The animal had not imagined the predator in the man's gaze. It had identified kinship of function. The third test became the real attack. Perhaps the beast decided the stillness had gone on long enough. Perhaps pain and drugs and captivity had finally burned through caution. It launched without warning, all 6 limbs driving, mouth wide, tail cutting the air like a cable under string. Elias met the first line by stepping inside it, which made no sense until Tarav realized distance favored the jaws and tail, while proximity endangered only the forelimbs and weight. Elias slammed the wrapped arm under the lower jaw to spoil the bite, rode the impact half sideways, and in the same impossible fluid motion drove the injector hard into the seam behind the cranial ridge where the armor thinned. The beast bucked, caught him across the ribs with one claw, and sent both of them into the deck barrier in a crash of metal and flesh that tore a sound out of the entire gallery. Security surged. Mar shouted to hold. Tarav could not move at all. On the deck below, human and beast separated by inches. VX-113 reared once, twice, roaring now in full chamber-breaking fury. Sedative markers flashed green on the control board. Good placement. Fast uptake. But not instant, never instant with a body built like a siege engine. Elias stayed low, one hand braced on the deck, blood already soaking through the left side of his gray vest where the claw had opened him. He did not retreat. That was the final thing the beast saw. It lunged one last time, weaker now, more reflex than choice. Elias's eyes met it at the exact instant the body failed under the drugs. The creature stopped. Just stopped. Momentum sagged out of it, as if some invisible cord had been cut. The huge head lowered. The legs folded, not neatly, but in the ugly, reluctant sequence of a body overridden by chemistry it did not consent to. One breath. Another. Then stillness. Vast and terrible and finally non-lethal. No one in the gallery spoke. Elias remained crouched in front of the unconscious beast for a few seconds longer, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side. He looked not triumphant, not relieved, but almost weary beyond language. Then he pushed himself upright and said into the chamber mic, voice ragged now. Next time, maybe build the enclosure for the animal you've got, not the one your paperwork prefers. Only then did the room recover enough to move. Med teams flooded the corridor. Mar went in first, because some loyalties move faster than rank. Terav stayed exactly where he was at the observation glass, while everyone else erupted into post-crisis action around him. The unconscious beast below looked suddenly enormous in its helplessness. The blood on the deck looked even darker against the dimmed lights. Elias, one arm over Mar's shoulder now, seemed smaller somehow, without the tension of danger making him larger than the room. Yet Terav could not unsee what had happened in the chamber. The beast had recognized the predator in the man's gaze. And he, Terav's sound scientist, skeptic, civilized professional, proud enemy of myth, had watched it happen and discovered that no language currently available to him could reduce the moment back into safe taxonomy. That was why, when the export liaison began babbling about security implications and human threat categorization and whether the directorate ought to reconsider species access policies, Terav finally turned and said, with a coldness that stunned the room quieter than the queen of any empire might have, "No." The liaison faltered. "No what?" "No, that is not what this means." Terav heard his own voice and recognized that the chamber had changed him too. "It does not mean humans are monsters waiting to happen. It means you have all spent too long pretending predation is simple because it frightens you less that way." He pointed through the glass toward the deck where medics were cutting Elias out of his blood-soaked vest while the sedated beast lay breathing in huge slow pulls. That animal did not bow to savagery. It responded to being understood by something capable of ending it. His gaze sharpened on the liaison. "If that unsettles you, good. Be unsettled for the correct reason." No one answered him. They were still too busy being speechless. And perhaps that was right. Some moments should not be repaired too quickly with commentary. Some truths need to remain sharp enough to wound the foolish on contact. On Keled 9, in the aftermath of the containment breach, the story spread faster than the official report ever could. The beast had looked into a human's eyes and stopped pretending the room belonged only to it. The alien scientists had no words for what passed in that silence. The station began using the phrase predator recognition event in public to avoid admitting how deeply the old fear ran. Mark called it Tuesday with Voss and nearly got suspended for it. Elias himself refused all dramatic retellings and spent his recovery complaining about the quality of station medical tea. But Terav remembered. He remembered the stillness, the tests, the feint, the strike, and above all the look. Not bloodlust, not cruelty. The colder, older thing beneath both. The settled willingness to become lethal without confusion when the line demanded it. The beast had seen that first. And once Terav saw it too, he understood why so many species kept misunderstanding humans until crisis tore the politeness off. They looked social. They looked ordinary. Then something in the room crossed the right threshold, and all at once the death world behind their eyes became visible. The beast had recognized it immediately. The alien who watched from the glass had no words left. And perhaps, Terav would later think, that was the most honest reaction of all.